Slightly shorter module here.
Yeah, so what we've done now is essentially moved up through the process of building clouds. And clouds are the way that you carve up your overall capacity and allocate it out to users, groups, and give them access to specific resources in VMM. Now, as we get into, and we deploy VMs onto clouds, but you can deploy things that are more complex than just VMs, right? You can deploy groups of VMs that represent collections of functionality known as services. And, the simplest example of this is an application that contains, SQL database, some business logic, and a web front end. That's 3 VMs. All 3 VMs are configured slightly differently. All 3 VMs have different requirements. A service model allows you to define them, define the relationships between them, and actually build it out. And you've heard me allude to the fact a number of times for this particular day, but dragging and dropping networks to create connections between networks. So you're going to see how to do that in here. That where as you build these VMs, you have logical network objects. You just drag and drop and associate, and it builds the VMs essentially graphically for you. So let's go ahead and take a look at using service models for VMM.
All right, so what we're going to do here throughout this module is we're first going to talk about our services, and we're actually going to look how we deploy one. We'll go take a break, and after the break, our final module, we'll look at integration with the other System Center components. So first of all, what is a service? What is a service template? Well, I talked about this a few times. Our service is our logical unit to manage a collection of VMs. Manage it together, deploy it together, basically have this collection of VMs serve similar to a single instance. Now, this kind of trends with our models of virtualization. When we think about what is a virtual machine, it's an application which is abstracted from the underlying physical infrastructure. What is a service? Well, it's a service, it's a collection of VMs, again, abstracted from that underlying resource. So whether we're thinking a VM, thinking a service, key thing here is abstraction, no dependency on that underlying resource, free to move around. And so a service template is similar to a VM template. It's a predefined configuration for this multi-tier application. And we could deploy these templates either through Virtual Machine Manager, through App Controller, or through one of our other self-service portals. So let's take a look here at a sample service template, kind of the different things that could make this up. Now, in our examples, you're often going to see us use kind of this 3-tier model, where we have a back-end database running SQL, we have a front-end web tier running IIS with a web server, and we have an application tier that might do some custom business processing, where your line of business application runs. What we're essentially trying to do here is, across these 3 tiers, connect them to our cloud, right? So you say, hey, I need a new VM within my web tier. Go pull those resources out of my Contoso cloud. Now, services also come with the benefit that we try to make them easy to update. So you could do updating either a component within a VM. So let's say you have an application package you're updating from version 1 to version 2. You can just replace that application within the VM. Or you can actually replace the whole image itself. So let's say you have a master image for your web tier. You've patched the master image. You want to go replace the running image. You could go and do a replacement of the image at that running tier. So what we're now going to do here is take a look at creating a service template. Now, service templates have to be built by the administrator. And they will look, they're kind of like an extension of almost Visio, right? It's kind of that same layout you saw with Orchestrator, but rather than create individual actions that are connected, we're basically creating VMs that are connected. And we're defining these connections using a graphical interface. So instead of having to think about, does network 1 connect to VM 1, we just draw the connection, and it will make that connection for us. After we've gone and actually created these VMs, we can then create a deployment of them. So you say deploy the service. It then goes and figures out which VMs should run on which host. It's going to validate things such as availability, memory settings, and then give you the option to go deploy the service on Hyper-V, VMware, Citrix, based on whether those VMs can run on those platforms. So let's go over to our demo now and actually look at creating and deploying our services. So I'm going to close out my dev user role, switch back to my administrator role. We can see that from the top, and go back to my library. Now within the library, under our template settings, we have 2 templates that we've built already. let's go and use these two templates with our front-end web tier, our back-end database tier, and go create a two-tiered service template. So first thing it's going to ask me is how many tiers, 1, 2, or 3.
And so what you've got here are basically some just initial templates or suggestions.
Yep.
You can go blank and do whatever you want, but
Scale them out,
these are
absolutely.
Some pretty common examples here.
So we'll call this Pet Shop Service. Release is going to be version 1.0. Click OK. And what you now see here is the Service Template Designer. I'm going to just adjust the zoom a little so we can see it better. And here you go. We see what we call our service, the name, who owns it, the release. Let's make this a high priority service. And then we see the different tiers. Within each tier, though, we don't really have anything configured or anything defined, but this is where we can go and use our templates. Now, we could go and manually build each of these tiers out by clicking on the properties, going and add in these different profiles, hardware profile, etc. But since we built these templates, let's go and actually take advantage of our templates. So with our second tier, we're going to go and make that drag and drop. That's going to be our SQL tier with our web front end.
And so what you've done there is drag the VM template onto the tier, so we know that this tier is, for example, Windows operating system running SQL or running a web server.
That is correct. Yep.
And so no configuration, just drag and drop, and it's got the deployment notes for the operating system, the hardware requirements for the VM, and all the networking requirements as well.
That's correct. So I'm actually going to expand this out a little, minimize the properties so we get a better view of the designer. And then we can take a look here. Our VM template had 2 virtual NICs. Our SQL template had 4 virtual NICs. We can see the CPU, memory, the SQL packages, the name. And then we see that, none of these networks are connected. So building this service through the designer gives us the ability to actually add different networks, add load balancers, and even build up our network topology here. So I could take a look at this, this virtual network here that we've created and add that to an existing network. So we've now gone and said, hey, there's this virtual network that's going to be part of this service template. Let's go and connect it.
So what you've done there is drawn a switch.
That's correct.
And you're just dragging lines to say, hey, this NIC's on this switch.
That is correct.
And if you guys are looking real close, as he's drawing it under NIC 1, NIC 2, NIC 3, as the lines connect, you can see the actual NIC association switch to that network. So you see not connected for NIC 2, and you see Contoso VMnet for NIC, anyway, 2 and 3. Look at 2 and 3. Look at the difference.
So there we go. So this has gone and built our network connections. Now we also could add load balancers, things like that. Since we haven't configured the virtual IP address, we won't be able to add it in this example, but this really allows you to go build this topology. Now, as you're thinking about this as well, this can be used to design things like guest clusters. You can really run any application that you're going to go deploy within the VM from this. Now, remember, this is still built from a template. So we may still want to go and do some custom configuration here. So we could go and say view all of the properties of this template, and it will then go and let us change the hardware, the OS, all of these other settings again. Now if we go and actually expand this, we then get some service template settings as well. So this is going to be our Pet Shop SQL second tier. What is the order that we want to deploy this in? What is the order that we want to service this in? How many instances do we want? What's the maximum instance count? What is the minimum instance count?
So what do the instance counts actually do?
Bad zoom here. So the instance count is basically how many versions of this VM exist in that tier.
So you essentially say, hey, this definition of the service contains a web server, but I want 3 of them.
That's right.
And it'll actually make 3 web server VMs.
That is right. And what I'm actually going to do for my SQL tier, since I'm going to make that into a cluster, is I'm going to say the default instance is 2. I'm always going to have at least 2 VMs on that tier. We'll go cluster them later. So that's the default instance count. Minimum is 2. And we can even create an availability set for this tier as well, so that those 2 VMs, which are part of my SQL tier, that are going to be a guest cluster, automatically separate themselves across different hosts, using that anti-affinity class name property. So that's going to set up, that's going to set up our SQL tier. Back to our web tier. We're going to make our backend our first deployment, and then we're going to go and deploy our web tier second. And generally, you're going to have your databases up and running before you go and get your websites up and running. So that's why we're changing the deployment order. So a lot of stuff I just went through here, you know, kind of doing all this pre-configured stuff. Then we're going to go and save it. Now, as you save it, it's going to do some basic validation, make sure that, you know, you didn't mistakenly connect something that you shouldn't have connected. We'll close this Service Designer. And then we're going to go back into Virtual Machine Manager, and you'll notice we now have this service we've created. So final step of this service here is to go and deploy it. Now remember, this is still based on a template, so we still need to provide it with unique identifying information. So we'll call this Pet Shop Service 1. We figure out what cloud or what host it's going to run on. We'll deploy it to our cloud, abstract the underlying infrastructure. Now, if we made this service available to our end user, our developer role, they could go deploy that to the cloud as well. And then we see the deploy service wizard. We'll maximize that, fit this within the window, and it kind of simplifies what we're looking at here. So if you remember, our front-end web tier had one instance, we see one VM. Our back-end SQL tier had two instances, so we make a cluster from it. You can see that there's two VMs. And here's where you get to go and actually define additional names. So if you want to go and make these VM names even more unique, adjust additional settings, you go and have this option here. Now once you've gone and made these changes, you can refresh the preview. It's just going to validate everything, make sure everything's still going to be supported. We'll then go and click Deploy Service. And we get to see some errors here. The reason why is we're trying to go and deploy this application that requires, I think, about 70 gigabytes of RAM on a host that has 16 gigabytes of RAM. So for the sake of the demo, this is where we have to stop due to our lab limitations. But this is when you would actually say, go deploy the service, go place it. But again, we have this error simply based on the fact that in this lab I don't have enough resources.
Okay. Can I make an observation?
Yeah.
I have a migraine and I'm bleeding from the ears after listening to all that.
Yeah.
That seems complicated, right? There's a lot in there. And I think what I want to do is take a step back for a second for all the folks that are kind of listening and looking at this and going, holy smokes, that, you know, first of all, you probably didn't even know that was in VMM. A lot of people don't. It's a massive set of capabilities. And, you know, you start thinking about all the things we've gone through today, profiles and templates and virtual networks, and all, you know, after a while it just kind of gets kind of fuzzy and mashy and blurry. Here's a bit of a reality check, I guess, to a degree. 90% of you will never do this, right? You simply won't. You'll use VMM to manage the fabric and you'll deploy VMs. You may get into using clouds. A lot of people don't. There's still, you know, there's still an evolution that has to happen in the industry before, you know, these notions of clouds become really, really, you know, the day-to-day thing that every admin does. There's a learning curve you've got to go through to get to that point. So you kind of work your way up through the fabric, through VM management, then into clouds, and then eventually getting into things like services. So, you know, don't look at this and kind of be deterred from VMM in any way or be intimidated by it. 90% of you will never ever touch this. And for those of you that do, it's going to be a collaboration between not only the VMM folks, but the end users, the developers, the infrastructure people, because to go, you know, hit a button and deploy a multi-tiered application containing databases, application logic, web front ends, this is not a small thing. Now, once it's up and running, yeah, it's great because you can just go, hey, you know, we're, you know, let's go back to our example yesterday. You know, we inadvertently flooded a website. You know, had they been running that web solution on VMM using a service model, they could have gone, oh no, they're flooding our website, give me another web server, and it would have gone deployed another web server in a VM, and all of a sudden their capacity's increased. So you know, to get to that level of flexibility, though, it's a bit of work, it's a bit of planning, there's a lot of things to understand. So I just kind of wanted to, you know, inject it, you know, I don't know if I want to say a dose of reality, but just kind of some context around it for, you know, the everyday admins out there doing things.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And you know, as part of this deployment model, you saw we had the option to use a load balancer. Doing those kind of scale out scenarios is a great example where you just have that load balancer sitting in the front end. When you say scale out, it will actually reconnect to the load balancer and start using that as an available node as part of that configuration tier. So nice advantage of putting that load balancer there if you do want to have this kind of dynamic scale as well.
Absolutely. So someone asked, will it be on the test? Probably.
Probably. Yep. Probably.
I don't. I don't know that they're going to say, hey, when you.
We don't write the tests. So.
Yeah. Understand the purpose of service templates. Understand, what is possible. I don't know that you need to necessarily know how to do it all, but understand what's possible.
Yeah, conceptually at least.
And then someone asked a very specific question about the service templates relating to the switches. Like, is the switch that you drew, does that have to be deployed somewhere? And the answer is no. That's what you drew is the logical switch. And as long as all the network cards are associated with the right logical networks, that's how it connects the dots.
Correct. So. Yep. Good clarification. Well, let's wrap this up here by going through our app controller here. What is app controller? Oh, we kind of covered the basics a few times here. It is the self-service portal built on top of VMN if you're managing anything in the private cloud, works with Azure if you're managing anything in the public cloud, and then it also works with our third-party service providers. So when we go and connect App Controller to our different clouds, again, it's dependent on VMM or Azure or both. Basically, you could install App Controller by itself, but it's not going to do anything. It's not connected to anything. So essentially, it's an IIS website, and by itself, not going to do anything. But once we go integrate VMM, Azure, we could go get its full functionality. So let's now go over to our Azure demo. Our App Controller demo. Man, it's been a long 2 days here, a little sleep between. So here we go taking a look at App Controller. We went through the navigation at the start of the day, so we're going to skip that here and just actually show you what it looks like to deploy something. Now, taking a look at our existing App Controller view here, what you actually see is 3 different types of clouds. Our private cloud, our public cloud with Windows Azure, and then there's this other cloud in the middle here, this other third-party cloud, and this is what we call our service provider cloud. And again, this means that you can really connect to any Windows Server data center that's running System Center and go and manage your resources, your VMs in that other data center. So for example, if I'm running out of capacity in my lab, I could essentially go and deploy more VMs over in Whole Systems Core's lab, and I can start them, stop them, understand the performance, deploy them, scale them up, deploy a service over there. Essentially have the same management functions through App Controller, but we're just deploying it on someone else's infrastructure. And as we really try to think about, what are the advantages of virtual machines? It's allowing you to run that service anywhere. Our end users, who are the people that are caring about that, they don't really care where it's running, right? When you go and sign on to a website, do you care if it's running in a private cloud, a public cloud, a hosted cloud?
Absolutely not. It makes the expression, you only love me for my hardware, completely valid.
So what we're essentially doing here with this third-party hoster is accessing their resources, deploying there. Now, the way this works with our third-party hoster is it goes through this technology called Service Provider Foundation, or SPF. Now, Service Provider Foundation is built on top of 2 industry-standard web protocols, the REST protocol, and then OData protocol, which is used for authentication. And between these 2 protocols, this is basically the communication that gets sent back and forth from App Controller in my data center over to Core's service over in his data center. I say start a new VM. We write that out, those commands in our REST protocol, encrypt it, send it over, gets decrypted on the other side, figures out the actions, and then goes and performs those tasks. When it's complete, it'll send back a response, acknowledgement, and kind of give us a live status of this process.
Absolutely.
Handoff back and forth. So we're actually going to go and deploy it over into one of these data centers. I'm not actually connected over to Chorus. This is going to be one of our sample ones here, our Fabric Amp. But you can see that I've already got a lot of things running over in my private cloud. So some VMs running private cloud, 2 VMs running in our hoster, and 4 VMs running up in Azure. Now we can also deploy services as well. So, let's just take a look at what a service looks like as well. Does this look familiar? This is the exact same type of service diagram that we deployed inside Virtual Machine Manager with 2 instances on the database tier, 1 instance on our web tier. But it's simplified. It's exposed to our end user. Basically, we've cleaned it up, we've remapped it, and this is what our end user now has the ability to go and deploy, go and visualize. So that's the service that's already running. But let's actually go ahead and deploy a brand new one. Again, all of this is done through a website, right? We do not need to actually go and show anyone our underlying fabric. You know, I click cancel. If you look at the navigation window, we can have access to our clouds, our services, our VMs, our library, but no underlying fabric resources. All right, go back through the deployment again. So question number one, what cloud? Do I want to go deploy it to any of these private clouds? Deployment, production, staging. To my hostess cloud or to one of my Azure clouds, my Azure subscriptions. We'll take our hoster cloud. Then we get to go figure out which templates are going to be used within that cloud. So we'll pick our virtual machine manager template. And you know, this could be any template, right? A pre-configured one. This could be a template running Linux. We're flexible here. Then we provide unique information for this specific deployment. So we're going to go and paste our names in here. Confirm our other settings, so this provides unique information for this particular instance. We see it's connected to Contoso Network. Click Deploy, and now our VM deployment has started. So this is that end user experience that we've built for, let's say, the database administrators to go deploy their new SQL instance, for our developers to go and deploy their new app in a private cloud. And that is our app controller end user self-service experience.